Hello, my name is Christian Rodriguez, and today I will be discussing the importance of reporting human trafficking victimization. Let me start off by explaining what is human trafficking. According to Homeland Security, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. One important detail about human trafficking is that it does not relate to just one gender or culture. Any nationality, gender, race, or age is at risk of being victimized. To understand what human trafficking really is, we have to look at how the crime progresses to ultimately affect the victims involved. As an example, we will specifically be talking about sex trafficking in this scenario. It starts off by luring, which is explained as establishing a connection in person or online with the intent of developing a relationship for the purpose of exploitation, which we will talk about further towards the end. Afterwards, it moves on to grooming, which is explained as identifying and fulfilling the needs and dreams of the individual, for example by showering them with gifts. We then move to the isolation part of the example, which talks about the victim creating distance between the individual and their loved ones. This is the victim separates themselves from people that they know. We would then move on to manipulation and coercion, which is explained as sending mixed messages, making claims like "you owe me one," or making threats to cause the individual to feel their only option is to participate in commercial sex acts. And then we finish off with exploitation, which is ensuring an ongoing participation in commercial sexual acts while taking away their earnings. Now let's discuss the problem with the unreportedness of human trafficking. The main issue with human trafficking is the number of cases that go unreported and how that is affecting the services that are available to these victims. According to the National Institute of Justice, the crux of the problem is that in order for us to make accurate estimations of human trafficking from the collected data, law enforcement investigators need to be able to identify the victims. Victims could decide that they will not report their victimization due to several factors, some of them being that they are victimized by people that they know, that they think that their victimization is not important, among other things. Now this pie chart here shows the various types of traffickers that are most common in these situations. As you can see, 36% of traffickers are immediate family of the victim, meaning that the victim knows these people personally. Next up is 27% of the traffickers are boyfriends to the victims. And afterwards we could see that an even number of 14% of traffickers are friends of family and as well as employers. And the final 9% we could see that the traffickers are complete strangers to these victims. So overall we could see that the people that the victim knows mostly comes from immediate family more than strangers. Now I wanted to bring up some of the previous policies, strategies, and practices that have been established in previous years. Many acts were established in previous years to combat the high number of cases from human trafficking. Some of them are mentioned in this slide. One of them being the Customs and Facilitations and Trade Enforcement Act, which mentions importing goods made through slave labor. We also have the Mann Act, which talks about prohibiting transporting a minor or coercing an adult across state lines for commercial sex. And the Protect Act, which talks about penalties for people engaged in minor sex tourism. So the problem with the acts previously mentioned is that the way that society lives changes because of how advanced we can become with things such as technology. As it was briefly mentioned in the first slide, the internet is one way that traffickers can lure the victims into developing a relationship with the intent of exploitation. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, in 2004, the number of child pornography files online stood at 450,000. By 2011, the number had increased to 17 million. Child victims are the ones that are most susceptible to these situations, as we could see, because of how often they are on the web. According to Thorne Survivor Survey, 3 out of 4 victims are trafficked online. They also mentioned that over 3/4 of underage sex trafficking victims that they spoke with said they had been advertised or sold online. The internet simplifies illegal transactions for Johns and helps create new opportunities for pimps who profit from the sexual victimization of children. An issue that is looked over is the requirement of reporting human trafficking investigations conducted by federal agencies. According to the United States Government Accountability Office, 3 of the 4 federal agencies that investigate or prosecute human trafficking-related crimes do not require their agents or attorneys to consistently collect or record the number of federal human trafficking investigations. The reason that reporting these crimes is so important is not only for the information that departments and services can receive through it, but also to help the victim with any physical, mental, and emotional trauma that they might be going through. Pascual Leon discusses these issues in his article by mentioning the mindset that victims could have, such as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, mental health problems, isolation, and dependence. According to Pascual Leon, obstacles that obstruct individuals from gaining legal protections include lack of awareness of resources that are designated to help, not identifying with being a victim, and unfamiliarity with the location. This could lead to the victim thinking that they do not deserve to receive help from health professionals, maybe because they might not think that it is a serious issue that has to be addressed. Some of the recommendations for policymakers are mentioned in the next few slides. One of them is being screening methods, such as surveys, could help with identifying victims. Health professionals could use this approach to document and report the victimization without the victim having to speak out if they do not feel comfortable. According to MUMA, a single screening question may be sufficient to identify all adult victims of sex trafficking in the ED. As you can see from this chart, it shows how cases have been increasing, which could be seen as a bad thing and a good thing, because even though we are seeing an increase in human trafficking cases, it could also be seen in a different perspective, because that means that more cases are coming to light from victims deciding to report their victimization and or from methods that health professionals are using to identify victims of human trafficking. The overall coordination between health providers and organizations is crucial to the victims because it could help with any disorders or problems that the victim could be experiencing. According to Hemmings, future research should generate empirical evidence to develop trafficking indicators for use by health providers alongside validated screening tools and evaluate the effectiveness of psychological interventions. With the help of both parties, more human trafficking cases will be revealed, which could lead to more services being created that target the specific psychological, emotional, and physical issues that victims might have as a result of their victimization. As we can see in this diagram, it shows who the victim meets while they're being trafficked. As you can see, 3.4% of victims come in contact with pediatricians. 8.5% of victims come in contact with traditional or alternative healthcare professionals. Then we can see that 26.5% of victims come in contact with dentists and OBs. Following that, we could see that 44.4% of victims come in contact with primary care healthcare professionals. Then we can see that 55.6% of victims come in contact with emergency department healthcare professionals. And then we have 0.9% of victims that don't know if they've come in contact with any sort of healthcare professional, and 5.1% of victims that have come in contact with other forms of healthcare professionals. One final recommendation that could greatly impact the issue of victims not reporting their victimization is to raise more awareness in our communities. According to Powell, the Trafficking Awareness Training for Healthcare Act of 2015 engaged the healthcare community by increasing information, awareness, and training for healthcare professionals in health profession schools, including schools of medicine and nursing. This could be the key to helping victims feel safer to report their victimization and not feel as if their life does not matter as much as someone else's. With more cooperation and contribution from different departments and stakeholders, we can make a big difference not only in the percentage of unreported cases, but also in the lives of the victims who are affected by human trafficking. These are some of the references that I used. And these are the other references that I used to get the information and diagrams for this presentation. Thank you.